In the heart of a dense and dangerous forest, a rich man with cold gestures carries two blind 6-year-old twin girls. The children, innocent and confused, not understanding what's happening, are forcibly tied to the trunk of a sturdy tree, where the man binds them with thick rope. "The wolves should come quickly. You won't last even one night here." Upon hearing these words, the twins begin to cry. They hear the man's footsteps moving away, and hours drag on until suddenly their hearts race upon hearing the fierce growl of hungry wolves approaching closer and closer. But then a loud neigh cuts through the tension of the moment. A white horse appears running toward the danger, and what happens next leaves everyone in complete shock. Before we begin, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe now to our channel so you don't miss any emotional stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The forest seemed to swallow the sounds of the outside world, creating a dense silence that only amplified the frantic beating of a heart. Among the ancient trees, where sunlight fought desperately to break through the tangled canopy, a man walked with calculated steps, carrying in his arms two small figures who trusted his words blindly. Helena and Sophia, 6-year-old twins, clung to the clothes of the man they knew as Daddy, their small hands trembling not from the cold, but from an unease they couldn't explain. Born with a blindness that had accompanied them since birth, they had learned to navigate the world through their other senses, creating a universe rich in textures, smells, and sounds that guided them better than any sight. "Where are we going, Daddy?" whispered Helena, the elder by just a few minutes, her voice filled with a childish confidence, yet unbroken by the world's cruelties. "It's a special surprise, my darling," the man replied, his voice masking a coldness the girls couldn't perceive. "A place where you'll stay for a little while Daddy takes care of some important things." Sophia, always more sensitive to the emotional vibrations around her, felt something strange in his tone. There was a tension that hadn't been there before, a stiffness in the muscles of the arms that held her, as if each step were a monumental effort. But she trusted him. She had always trusted him. After all, he was the man who had appeared in their lives when Mommy had to leave for a job very far away. The business tycoon Edward Sterling walked with determination through Wolf Creek Hollow, a region the locals avoided, especially after dusk. At 45, he had built an empire on flawless appearances and an impeccable reputation. His always pristine suits, his Italian leather shoes, his ramrod posture, everything about him screamed success and sophistication. But behind this facade lived a man consumed by the need to maintain an image that could not be tarnished by anything. The twins were the product of a relationship he preferred to forget. Clara, their mother, had been just an employee at one of his properties, a simple woman who cared for the horses with a dedication he had initially admired. When she became pregnant, he offered money to handle the situation, but Clara refused, insisting on having the babies. The birth of the girls with a visual impairment was, for Edward, confirmation that the relationship had been a mistake. He supported them financially, visited occasionally, but always with the feeling that they represented a threat to the perfect life he was building. Now, with his arranged marriage to Isabella Montgomery, daughter of one of the region's most prominent old money families, he could no longer afford complications in his biography. Isabella had been clear. She would not accept stepdaughters, especially not with a disability. "People like us can't have imperfections in our family line," she had said, with a coldness that had impressed even Edward. "Find a solution, or our deal is off." The scent of the forest was intense, a mixture of damp earth, decaying leaves, and wildflowers that grew without human care. Helena recognized the familiar perfume of nature, remembering the days she and Sophia played in the yard of the house they shared with their mother. But there was something different about this place, an energy that made her feel small and vulnerable. "Are we there yet, Daddy?" asked Sophia, noticing that his steps had slowed and his breathing had become heavier. "Almost there," Edward replied, approaching a sturdy tree whose trunk was wide enough for his plans. "You're going to love this place. It's full of adventures." Ooh, the girls smiled, imagining the adventures that awaited them, unaware they were about to face the greatest test of their young lives. Wolf Creek Hollow held ancient secrets, but also unexpected protections that not even Edward could have imagined. The sound of ropes being uncoiled echoed through the forest like a sinister omen. From the backpack he wore, Edward pulled out 2 rolls of thick rope, a material he had bought at a distant store where no one knew him. His hands, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts and shaking hands on major deals, now trembled slightly as he prepared what he considered his only way out. "Why are we stopping here, Daddy?" Helena asked, her voice still filled with trust, but with a hint of concern beginning to grow in her small chest. "This is the special place I promised," Edward replied, gently placing the girls on the damp forest floor. "You'll stay here for a little bit while I go get the surprise I've prepared for you." Sophia felt the ground beneath her bare feet. He had taken off their shoes during the walk, claiming it would be more comfortable. The earth was cold and slightly wet, with small leaves and twigs that tickled her toes. The intense smell of vegetation surrounded her, but there was something in the atmosphere she couldn't identify, a tension that made her stomach churn. Edward began to work methodically, tying one of the ropes around Helena's delicate waist. The girl laughed, thinking it was part of some elaborate game. "Is this a game, Daddy? Like the ones Mommy used to play with us?" "Exactly," Edward lied, his voice forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "You're going to play brave explorers. The ropes will help you not get lost while I'm gone." As he tied Sophia to the other side of the sturdy tree, Edward avoided looking directly at the girls' faces. Helena had her mother's delicate features, wavy brown hair that shone even in the dim forest light, rosy cheeks that still held their childhood roundness. Sophia was slightly thinner, with a more serious expression, but her eyes, even without sight, had a depth that had always unsettled him. "Daddy, the rope is tight," Helena complained, trying to move her arms but finding her mobility severely limited. "It's to make sure you stay safe," Edward replied, checking the knots with a precision that revealed prior planning. "When I get back, we'll leave this place and start our new life together." But his words sounded hollow even to himself. Edward knew he wasn't coming back. The plan was simple and cruel. Leave the girls in the forest, return to the city, and tell everyone they had been sent to a special boarding school in another state. In time, he would invent a story about a tragic accident, gain society's sympathy, and move on with his life beside Isabella without complications. Sophia began to fidget, pulling at the rope that bound her to the trunk. Her intuition, always sharper than her sister's, was sounding alarms in her mind. Something was terribly wrong. "Helena," she whispered, "can you reach me?" The girls discovered that Edward had positioned them so they could barely touch each other's fingertips, an added cruelty that left them almost isolated, yet with the torture of knowing their sister was close but unreachable. Edward took a few steps back, observing his work. The girls looked so small and vulnerable, tied to that gigantic tree. For a moment, a pang of what might have been remorse shot through his chest, but he quickly smothered it. Isabella was waiting for him. His new life was waiting. He couldn't afford pity. "I'm going to get the surprise now," he said, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Stay quiet and be good. I won't be long." "Promise you'll be back soon, Daddy?" Helena asked, and there was a plea in her voice that almost broke Edward's resolve. "I promise," he lied one last time, knowing he was uttering the cruelest lie of his life. With increasingly quick steps, Edward began to walk away from the girls, ignoring the calls that echoed behind him, ignoring the tears that started to stream down his own face, ignoring the voice of his conscience screaming that he was making the biggest mistake of his existence. The silence that followed Edward's departure was deafening. Helena and Sophia remained motionless for a few minutes, processing what had happened, their childish minds struggling to comprehend a reality that made no sense. The wind whispered through the leaves above, creating a melancholy symphony that seemed to echo the growing despair in their small hearts. "Sophia?" Helena called, her voice trembling. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, Helena. Right here beside you," Sophia replied, stretching her arm as far as she could, trying to reach her sister. "Can you touch my hand?" The girl's fingertips brushed lightly, a minimal contact that represented their only physical connection in that terrible moment. It was as if Edward had calculated the exact distance to maximize their suffering, close enough to feel each other's presence, but too far to properly comfort one another. Helena began to pull at the rope with more force, her small fists clenching around the rough fiber that cut into her delicate skin. "Why did Daddy tie us up like this? I don't understand this game." Sophia, though only a few minutes younger, had always shown an emotional maturity that allowed her to perceive nuances Helena missed. Something in Edward's voice, in the haste with which he had left, in the way he had avoided answering their questions directly, it all combined in her mind to form a terrifying picture. "Helena," she said carefully, "I don't think this is a game." What do you mean?" Helena stopped pulling the rope, her attention fully on her sister. His voice was different. He was nervous, scared, and he's never left us alone before, not even at home. Why would he leave us alone in a strange forest? Sophia's words echoed among the trees, carrying a truth they were both beginning to recognize, but that their minds refused to fully accept. How could they believe that the man they called Daddy, who visited them with gifts, who had promised to always take care of them, could abandon them in such a way? Time in the forest seemed to move differently. Without the visual reference of the sun or clocks, the girls navigated only by the subtle changes in the sounds around them. The birds that had been singing cheerfully when they arrived began to give way to other sounds, more distant, wilder noises that made their hearts race. "I'm thirsty," Helena murmured, her throat already dry from calling for the father who did not return. "Me too," Sophia admitted, "and hungry." They had eaten a light snack in the car, but Edward had promised a special picnic at the adventure spot. Another lie that was now cruelly revealed. Helena's stomach began to rumble, a sound that seemed amplified in the forest's silence. Sophia closed her eyes, a useless gesture, but one that helped her focus even more on the sounds around her. She could hear the wind rustling the high leaves, the distant crackle of dry twigs, and something else, something that made her tremble. "Helena," she whispered, "do you hear that?" "What?" "That sound, like something is moving in the woods." Helena strained her hearing, trying to identify what her sister had perceived. There it was, a subtle but constant noise, as if something large were walking slowly among the trees, not far from them. "It could be Daddy coming back," Helena suggested with a sliver of hope. "No," Sophia shook her head. "Daddy makes a different noise when he walks. He wears those shoes that go click-clack on the ground. This is different." Fear began to take a more concrete form. They were alone, vulnerable, tied up in a forest they didn't know, and there was something moving nearby. The reality of their situation began to seep into their young minds like ice-cold water, breaking down the last barriers of denial. "Sophia," Helena said, her voice almost inaudible, "I don't think Daddy is coming back." "I know," Sophia replied, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know." The two girls huddled against the tree trunk, trying to make themselves smaller, less visible, as the sounds of the forest intensified around them. Night was falling, and with it, dangers they couldn't even imagine. Night fell slowly in Wolf Creek Hollow, bringing with it a chill that pierced through the girl's light clothing. Helena began to shiver, not just from the cold, but from the fear that grew in her chest like a poisonous weed. Sophia, noticing her sister's distress, began to speak softly, trying to calm them with happier memories. "Remember the stories Mommy used to tell about the guardian animals?" Sophia whispered, her voice carrying a tenderness that contrasted with the despair of their situation. Helena stopped trembling for a moment, her mind turning to the cozy nights when Clara would lull them to sleep with fantastic tales. She said there were special animals that protected lost children. "That's right," Sophia continued, forcing a smile Helena couldn't see but could feel in her sister's voice. "She said that when a child was in danger, the guardian animals would appear to help." Clara had been a devoted mother, working tirelessly at the Sterling family stables to support her daughters. She cared for the horses with a genuine love, and the girls grew up surrounded by these majestic animals. Clara always said that horses were special creatures, able to feel people's hearts and protect those they loved. "Remember Thunder?" Helena asked, referring to the white horse Clara cared for with special affection. "How could I forget?" Sophia smiled for real for the first time since they'd arrived in the forest. "He always came running when we called. Thunder was a purebred Arabian with a coat as white as snow and intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. Clara had been specifically assigned to his care, and a special bond had developed between the family and the animal. The girls would spend hours stroking his silky mane, whispering secrets into his ears, and he seemed to understand every word. "Mommy said he was special," Helena continued, the memory bringing a little warmth to her frozen heart. "That he could find lost people. She used to tell that story about the boy who got lost on the mountain," Sophia added, "and how Thunder brought him back home." Clara truly believed that Thunder possessed special abilities. Several times, when an animal from the farm went missing, he managed to find it and bring it back. There was an inexplicable connection between the horse and any creature in peril, as if he possessed a protective instinct that went beyond the ordinary. "Do you think he knows we're here?" Helena asked, her voice filled with a childish hope that clung to any possibility of salvation. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to send a mental message to the horse they loved so much. "Thunder," she whispered, "if you can hear me, we need you. We're lost and scared." The wind shifted, bringing different scents from the forest. Sophia sniffed the air, trying to identify something familiar, some sign that they weren't completely alone. There was the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, wildflowers, and something else. Something that made her heart race. "Helena," she said suddenly, "do you smell that?" "What smell?" "It's like there's an animal nearby." "But it's not a bad smell, it's a familiar one." Helena inhaled deeply, forcing her senses to catch what her sister had perceived. There it was, a musky but familiar scent that awakened memories of sunny afternoons in the stable. "It smells like Thunder," Helena murmured, hardly daring to believe her own words. "Exactly," Sophia confirmed, her heart beating faster. "It's exactly his smell." The girls fell silent, listening intently for any sound that might confirm their hopes. The forest seemed to have quieted, as if waiting for something important to happen. Even the wind had stopped, creating an expectant silence that made each of their heartbeats sound like a drum. "Could it be possible?" Helena asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Mommy always said that true love can overcome any distance," Sophia replied, remembering Clara's words about the special connection between hearts that love each other. As the girls clung to this fragile hope, they didn't know that their childish prayers were about to be answered in a way that not even Clara could have imagined in her most fantastic stories. The darkness of the forest intensified with each passing minute, enveloping the girls like a heavy cloak that amplified every sound and every fear. Over the years, Sophia had developed a special ability to interpret the noises around her, and now that skill was becoming their only tool for survival. "Helena," she whispered, her voice tense, "something is moving over there, near those trees." Helena strained her hearing, trying to catch what her sister had perceived. There it was, a subtle rustle of leaves being stepped on, dry twigs snapping under the weight of something heavy. But there was something sinister in this sound, something that made her blood run cold. "It's different from the smell we noticed before," Sophia continued, her breathing becoming shallower. This is the smell of danger." A low growl echoed through the trees, a guttural sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. The girls huddled against the tree trunk, trying to make themselves invisible, their hearts beating so loudly they feared the sound might attract even more unwanted attention. Suddenly, two small yellow lights appeared in the darkness, glowing like malevolent stars amidst the vegetation. Sophia couldn't see them, but Helena, who retained a slight perception of light and shadow, could vaguely make out those luminous dots that made her tremble with terror. "Sophia," Helena murmured, her voice barely audible. "There are glowing eyes out there." "What kind of eyes?" Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "Yellow, and they're moving towards us." The young wolf had detected the girl's scent some time ago. He wasn't yet the experienced predator he would become with age, but hunger drove him to investigate this potential easy prey. He moved cautiously between the trees, his primitive instinct assessing the situation. The girls remained motionless, breathing as quietly as possible. Sophia had learned from Clara that some animals were drawn by movement and fear, so she tried to control her panic, even as the predator's musky scent intensified. "Don't move," Sophia whispered almost imperceptibly. "Don't make a sound." The wolf drew closer, his steps now clearly audible on the layer of dry leaves covering the forest floor. Helena could see its silhouette slowly materializing in the darkness. A medium-sized animal, dark fur, a long snout sniffing the air, trying to decipher these strange scents. The predator stopped a few feet from the girls, tilting its head from side to side, sizing them up. They seemed harmless, but there was something about the scene that made it wary. The ropes, the scent of human fear, the forced immobility, it all created a scenario that didn't fit its normal hunting patterns. Helena felt a tear slide down her cheek, and the minimal movement was enough to catch the wolf's attention. It growled louder, baring the white teeth that gleamed in the faint light, filtering through the treetops. "Sophia," Helena whimpered, unable to control her terror any longer. "It's coming." "Be quiet," Sophia pleaded, but she herself was fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The wolf took a few more steps toward the girls, its posture now clearly aggressive. It could sense the fear emanating from them like an irresistible perfume, and its hunger was beginning to overcome its natural caution. Helena began to sob quietly, unable to stop herself. The sound seemed to trigger something in the predator, which tensed to attack, lowering its body and coiling the muscles in its hind legs. "Please," Sophia whispered, not knowing if she was speaking to the wolf, to God, or to the guardian animals from her mother's stories. "Please, don't hurt us." The wolf growled one last time and prepared to leap when something extraordinary happened. A powerful sound echoed through the forest, a loud, defiant neigh that made the predator freeze instantly. The cavalry had arrived, and it had a name the girls knew very well. The neigh that echoed through the forest carried a force that seemed to make the very trees tremble. It was a sound that Helena and Sophia recognized instantly, even in the midst of the terror consuming them. Their hearts pounded, but this time with hope, not fear. "Thunder!" Helena cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. The young wolf took a few steps back, confused by the sudden shift in the situation's dynamics. It had prepared for an easy hunt, but now it was confronted by something much larger and more dangerous than itself. From between the trees, a majestic figure emerged like a white ghost in the darkness. Thunder, the Arabian horse Clara had cared for with such love, advanced with an elegance that contrasted with the urgency of his mission. His white coat seemed to glow with its own light, and his dark eyes showed an intelligence and determination that were impressive even in the forest's gloom. "It's him! It's really him!" Sophia cried, her tears now of relief and joy. Thunder positioned himself between the girls and the wolf, his posture erect and imposing. The horse was significantly larger than the predator, and his presence completely altered the balance of power in the clearing. He lowered his head, baring his large teeth, and stomped one of his front hooves on the ground with force, creating an intimidating sound that echoed through the forest. The wolf, still young and inexperienced, quickly assessed the new situation. This was no longer an easy hunt. The horse was a formidable opponent, clearly willing to protect the human children. After a few seconds of hesitation, the predator decided it wasn't worth the risk and retreated slowly, its yellow eyes fixed on Thunder until it disappeared completely into the darkness. "Thunder, you came," Helena sobbed, trying to stretch as far as possible towards the horse. "You really came to save us." The horse approached the girls carefully, sniffing the air to make sure there were no other dangers nearby. Once convinced they were safe for the moment, he lowered his head and gently touched Helena's face with his soft muzzle, a gesture of affection she recognized immediately. "Sophia, he's here with us," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "He's touching my face just like he used to when we were little." Sophia reached out her hand as far as she could, and Thunder noticed her attempt. He moved carefully so she could touch him too, allowing her fingers to find his silky mane. "Hi, my sweet boy," Sophia whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "I knew you would come. Mommy always said you were special." Thunder stayed close to the girls for a few minutes, offering them the comfort of his presence. But it soon became clear that his mere presence, while reassuring, didn't solve the main problem. The girls were still tied up, vulnerable and in need of real help. The horse began to examine the ropes binding Helena, sniffing and trying to understand how he could help. He tried to bite the rope, but the material was thick and tough, and his teeth, though large, couldn't effectively cut it. "He's trying to free us," Helena observed, feeling the horse's cautious movements around her. "Thunder is smart," Sophia said with conviction. "He'll find a way." The horse tried pulling the rope with his teeth, but only managed to fray it slightly. Frustrated, he stepped back a few paces and began to neigh loudly, a sound that seemed to echo throughout the forest like a distress call. "What's he doing?" Helena asked. "I think he's calling for help," Sophia replied, her intuition grasping the animal's intent. "He knows he can't free us by himself." Thunder continued to neigh at regular intervals, as if sending a signal. His exceptional intelligence made him understand that while he could protect the girls from immediate predators, they needed human help to be truly free. Meanwhile, the night deepened and other sounds began to echo through the forest. Thunder remained alert, his ears constantly twitching, catching every noise that might represent danger. He had found his little charges, but the real battle for their salvation had only just begun. 2 hours away from the forest, on the Sterling family estate, Joaquin Shaw was experiencing an unease he couldn't explain. The 60-year-old caretaker had worked for the family for over 2 decades, knowing every corner of the land as if it were his own home. That night, Something kept him awake, pacing back and forth in his small house near the stables. Joaquin had always had a special affection for Clara and her daughters. When Edward had abruptly dismissed the young mother, claiming personnel restructuring, the caretaker knew there was more to the decision. Clara was one of the best horse handlers he had ever known, dedicated and competent. Her dismissal had coincided suspiciously with Edward's engagement to Isabella Montgomery. That afternoon, Edward had arrived at the property acting strangely. He was nervous, sweating excessively, and had asked to use one of the farm's trucks, claiming his own car had problems. When he returned a few hours later, his clothes were dirty with earth and leaves, as if he had been walking through the woods. "Where are the girls, Mr. Sterling?" Joaquin had asked, noticing that Helena and Sophia weren't in the truck. "They went to visit some relatives," Edward had answered quickly, avoiding the caretaker's gaze. "They'll be staying there for a while." But there was something in Edward's voice that didn't convince Joaquin. In all his years working for the family, he had developed the ability to read his employer's expressions and tone of voice. Edward was lying, and badly. Joaquin decided to take a walk through the stables to check on the animals before bed. It was then that he noticed something that deeply worried him. Thunder was not in his stall. The white horse, which Clara always said was special, had disappeared. "This isn't normal," Joaquin muttered to himself, checking the stable again. Thunder was a disciplined horse who rarely tried to escape. When he did, there was always an important reason. The caretaker grabbed a flashlight and began searching for signs of how the horse had gotten out. He found the fence slightly damaged at a specific point. Thunder had forced his way through, something that required very strong motivation. Following the tracks, Joaquin reached a small wooden bridge that crossed the creek on the property. There, in the damp mud, he found something that made his blood run cold. Adult human footprints accompanied by 2 sets of small children's footprints, all heading towards the forest. "Dear Lord," Joaquin whispered, kneeling to examine the marks more closely. The footprints were recent, likely made that afternoon. And one of the adult footprints had the characteristic pattern of the expensive Italian shoes Edward always wore. The caretaker followed the tracks for a few more yards until they disappeared into the denser vegetation. His heart began to pound as he understood the direction the marks indicated: Wolf Creek Hollow. Joaquin knew the local legends about that part of the forest. The region's old-timers always warned to avoid that place, especially at night. It wasn't superstition. It was practical knowledge passed down through generations about the real dangers that inhabited the area. "It can't be," he murmured, but the evidence was there, as clear as the moonlight on the mud. He wouldn't be capable of, but Edward would be capable. Joaquin was beginning to understand the extent of his employer's cruelty. The girls weren't visiting relatives. They were lost in the most dangerous forest in the region, likely abandoned there by their own father. The caretaker ran back to his house, his mind racing. He needed help, but he also needed proof. Accusing Edward Sterling without concrete evidence would be professional and personal suicide. The man had enough power and influence to destroy the life of anyone who confronted him. Joaquin grabbed a backpack and began to fill it with supplies. Rope, an extra flashlight, water, some basic first aid items. If his suspicions were correct, he had a long night ahead of him. Before leaving, he quickly wrote a letter detailing his findings and suspicions, sealed it in an envelope, and hid it in a safe place. If something happened to him during the search, at least someone would know the truth. "Hang on, girls," he said to the night. "Joaquin's coming for you." While Joaquin prepared for his nighttime search in the Sterling mansion, Isabella Montgomery paced nervously through the luxurious corridors, her intuition picking up on inconsistencies in the story Edward had told her. At 32, Isabella was a woman accustomed to being in control of every situation, and something about her fiancé's behavior deeply troubled her. Edward had come home that night with his clothes wrinkled and an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of relief and guilt that piqued her curiosity. When she asked about her stepdaughters, he repeated the same story about visiting relatives, but his eyes couldn't meet hers as he spoke. "Edward," she said, entering his study where he was pretending to review documents, "I need to know exactly where Helena and Sophia are." "I already told you, darling," Edward replied without looking up from the papers. "They're with Clara's family out in the country. It'll be good for them to connect with their roots." "What family?" Isabella insisted, approaching the desk. "Clara was an orphan. You told me so yourself when you explained how she came to work here." Edward finally looked up, and Isabella saw something that alarmed her. There was panic in his eyes, a vulnerability that contrasted with the confidence he always projected. "You must be confusing her with someone else," he said, but his voice trembled slightly. Isabella had grown up in a family where appearances were everything, and she had developed an ability to detect lies and inconsistencies. Her influential father had always taught her that power lay in knowing others' secrets before they knew yours. "Edward, what did you do?" she asked directly, her voice filled with an authority that made him shrink in his chair. "Nothing you need to worry about," he replied, trying to regain his composure. "The girls are fine. It's temporary." "Temporary?" Isabella repeated, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in her mind. "Edward, they are your daughters. No matter what I said about not wanting stepchildren, you can't just make them disappear." Edward stood up abruptly, knocking over some papers in the process. "You said you wouldn't accept imperfections in our family. You said they represented everything that was wrong with my past." "I said that?" Isabella recoiled, shocked by her own cruelty being thrown back in her face. I was talking about custody arrangements, about specialized boarding schools, not about—" She stopped, unable to verbalize the terrible possibility taking shape in her mind. Edward was behaving like a man who had done something irreversible, something with no turning back. "Where are they, Edward?" Isabella asked again, this time with a firmness he recognized as dangerous. Edward walked to the window, staring into the darkness outside. "They're in a place where they can no longer disrupt our plans, where no one will find them." "What does that mean?" Isabella felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. "It means we're free to start our new life," Edward said, trying to sound convincing. "No complications, no secrets from the past, no daughters," Isabella completed, her voice just a horrified whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward realized he had revealed too much, and Isabella understood she was engaged to a man capable of horrors she couldn't imagine. "You have to bring them back," she said finally. "I can't," Edward replied without turning to look at her. "Why not?" Because it's too late." Isabella felt as if the floor were collapsing beneath her. She had grown up in a wealthy and powerful family, witnessed many questionable things done in the name of success and reputation, but never anything as monstrous as what Edward was implying. "I'm going to look for them," she said, heading for the door. "Isabella, no," Edward turned quickly. "You don't understand. If they come back, everything we've built will fall apart. Your family will never accept our marriage. My reputation will be destroyed." "Your reputation is already destroyed," Isabella replied coldly. "At least to me." As she left the study, Edward realized he had lost not only his daughters, but also the woman he thought he loved. And for the first time since leaving the girls in the forest, he began to question if the price of his ambition had been too high. Back in Wolf Creek Hollow, the second night deepened, bringing with it dangers that not even thunder could face alone. The horse remained vigilant beside the girls, his ears constantly twitching to catch any sound that might represent a threat. Helena and Sophia had managed to sleep for short periods, but hunger and thirst were beginning to take their toll on their small bodies. Sophia awoke with a shiver that made her tremble violently. The temperature had dropped significantly, and their light clothes offered little protection against the damp forest cold. She tried to move closer to Helena, but the ropes restricted her movements, allowing only their hands to touch lightly. "Helena," she whispered, "are you awake?" "I am now," Helena replied, her voice weak and hoarse. "I'm so cold." Thunder noticed the girl's discomfort and moved closer, trying to use his large body to create a barrier against the cold wind. The horse positioned himself strategically, blocking the icy breeze coming from the north of the forest. "He's trying to keep us warm," Helena observed, feeling the heat radiating from the animal's body. "Thunder is so smart," Sophia murmured, leaning as much as she could against the horse's side. "Mommy always said he was special." But the temporary warmth offered by Thunder wasn't enough to compensate for the physical deterioration the girls were experiencing. Helena felt dizzy, and Sophia realized her concentration was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. That's when the sounds came. First, it was a distant howl, low and prolonged, that echoed through the forest like a ghostly lament. Thunder immediately lifted his head, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Another howl answered the first, this time from a different direction. "What was that?" Helena asked, though she already knew the answer in her racing heart. "Wolves," Sophia replied simply, her voice surprisingly calm. "A pack." Thunder began to stir, moving nervously around the girls. He could face a young, inexperienced wolf, but a full pack presented a much greater challenge. His instincts told him the situation was becoming far too dangerous. The howls multiplied, creating a sinister symphony that seemed to come from all directions. The girls realized they were being surrounded by a force that not even their white protector could repel indefinitely. "How many do you think there are?" Helena asked, trying to control the panic in her voice. "A lot," Sophia replied, concentrating on the sounds. "I think there are at least 5 or 6. Thunder neighed loudly, a sound of defiance that echoed through the forest. It was his way of warning the predators that the girls were under his protection. But the wolves were not intimidated. They had detected vulnerable prey, and the pack's hunger was stronger than the fear of a single horse. The first pair of yellow eyes appeared between the trees, quickly followed by another, and then another. Helena could see the sinister lights moving in the darkness, forming a circle around their position. "They're surrounding us," she whispered to Sophia. Thunder positioned himself directly between the pack and the girls, lowering his head in an aggressive posture. He knew he couldn't win a fight against all the wolves, but he was determined to protect the children Clara had entrusted to his care. The pack's alpha wolf emerged slowly from the shadows, a large, experienced animal with scars that told stories of past battles. He assessed the situation with the intelligence of a veteran predator, calculating the odds of success against the protective horse. "Thunder," Sophia whispered. "You don't have to fight for us. You can go." But the horse didn't move. Instead, he neighed again, a sound that carried all the determination and loyalty he had learned from Clara. He would not abandon the girls, no matter the cost. The wolves began to circle, a hunting tactic they had perfected over generations. They knew the horse couldn't protect every direction at once, and it was then that Joaquin, following the sounds of Thunder's desperate neighs, finally got close enough to hear what was happening in the distant clearing. Joaquin had been walking through the forest for over 2 hours, following the tracks he had discovered near the bridge. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing broken branches and occasional footprints that confirmed his worst fears. The caretaker knew these trails like few others, having traversed the forest for decades in search of lost animals or to check the property's fences. When the first howls echoed through the night, Joaquin felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew the sounds of the pack that inhabited Wolf Creek Hollow, a family of predators that had grown and strengthened in recent years. If the girls were truly in that area, they were in mortal danger. It was then that he heard the neigh. The sound was unmistakable, the powerful voice of thunder echoing through the forest like a war cry. Joaquin stopped immediately, orienting himself by the direction of the sound. The horse was alive, and by the tone of his neigh, he was facing some kind of threat. "I found you," Joaquin murmured, quickening his pace towards the sounds of the battle unfolding in the distance. In the clearing where the girls were tied, the tension had reached a critical point. The alpha wolf had decided to test Thunder's defenses, approaching slowly while the rest of the pack held its position. The horse stood firm, but Helena and Sophia could feel his growing agitation. "He's scared," Sophia whispered, noticing the change in Thunder's breathing. "But he won't abandon us," Helena added, knowing the animal's loyal character. The first attack came from an unexpected direction. While the alpha distracted Thunder from the front, another wolf tried to approach from behind. The horse sensed the movement at the last second, spinning quickly and delivering a kick that missed the predator by inches. Sophia, with her sharp hearing, had detected the movement even before Thunder did. "Watch out! There's one coming from behind!" she shouted. Her warning saved the horse, who managed to defend himself in time. But the girl realized this was not a battle Thunder could win alone. There were too many of them, and they were using coordinated tactics. It was in this moment of desperation that Sophia made a decision that would change everything. Remembering the stories Clara used to tell about how animals communicated in the forest, she began to scream as loud as she could. "Help! Somebody help us! We're here in Wolf Creek Hollow!" Helena initially tried to silence her, fearing the screams would attract more predators. But then she understood her sister's strategy and joined her. "Help! Please! Somebody find us!" Their childish voices echoed through the forest, filled with desperation and hope. The wolves paused momentarily, confused by the loud, high-pitched sounds that disrupted their hunting ritual. Joaquin was about 500 yards from the clearing when he heard the screams. His heart pounded as he recognized the voices of Helena and Sophia. They were alive, and from the sounds, they were in immediate danger. The caretaker began to run, forcing his 60-year-old body through the dense vegetation. Branches scratched his face, and thorns tore at his clothes, but he didn't slow down. Those girls needed him. "Hang on, girls!" he shouted back, hoping his voice would reach them. "Joaquin is coming!" In the clearing, the girls heard the familiar voice and began to cry with relief. "It's Joaquin!" Helena cried out. "He's coming to save us!" The imminent arrival of human help changed the dynamic of the situation. The wolves, who preferred to hunt without interference, began to get nervous. The alpha growled a command to the rest of the pack, and they started to retreat slightly. Thunder sensed the change and took the opportunity to neigh even louder, calling to Joaquin and pinpointing his exact location. The horse knew help was on its way, but he also knew the next few minutes would be crucial. Joaquin could hear the sounds of the confrontation ahead, a horse's neighs, wolves' growls, and the frightened cries of the girls. He checked his backpack, making sure he had everything he needed: rope, a pocket knife, and a torch he could use to scare off the predators. "I'm almost there!" he shouted again, hoping his voice would give the girls courage and warn the wolves that the situation was about to change dramatically. Joaquin burst into the clearing like a force of nature, his flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal a scene that would be seared into his memory forever. Helena and Sophia were tied to the trunk of a gigantic tree, their small faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Thunder stood in a defensive position, surrounded by 6 wolves that formed a threatening circle around the children. "My God," Joaquin murmured, instantly grasping the gravity of the situation. The caretaker didn't hesitate. He pulled a pre-made torch from his backpack, lit it quickly with a lighter, and began to wave it toward the wolves. Fire had always been the greatest fear of wild predators, and the pack immediately recoiled at the sight of the flames dancing in the darkness. "Get out of here! Shoo!" Joaquin shouted, advancing toward the wolves with the torch extended. "Get out of here now!" The animals scattered quickly, but they didn't go far. Joaquin could see their eyes glowing in the darkness between the trees, waiting for an opportunity to return. He knew he had little time before curiosity and hunger brought them back. "Girls!" he yelled, running toward the tree. "Are you hurt?" "Joaquin!" Sophia cried, her voice broken with emotion. "I knew you would find us." "Daddy brought us here and left," Helena explained quickly, the words tumbling out. "He said he'd come back, but it's been a long time." A burning rage rose in Joaquin's chest as his suspicions about Edward were confirmed. But this was not the time for confrontations. First, he had to get the girls out of there. The caretaker examined the ropes binding Helena and Sophia. Edward had done a meticulous job, using complex knots that couldn't be easily untied. Joaquin pulled out his pocket knife and began to saw at the fibers, but the material was tough and the process was slow. "Thunder tried to free us," Sophia explained as Joaquin worked. "He bit the ropes, but he couldn't." "This horse is a hero," Joaquin said, looking with admiration at Thunder, who continued to stand guard. "He protected you all night." As he cut Helena's rope, Joaquin could hear the wolves moving in the surrounding forest. They hadn't given up. They were just waiting for the right moment to attack again. The torch in his left hand was burning down quickly, and he knew he didn't have much time. "Almost there," he muttered, feeling the last fiber of Helena's rope give way. "There you go, sweetheart. Now for you." Helena rubbed her sore wrists where the rope had cut into her delicate skin. Her legs were weak after hours in the same position, but she managed to stand. Joaquin started working on Sophia's rope, but this time the knots were even tighter. Edward had used more force tying the second girl, perhaps as his cruel resolve had strengthened. "Does it hurt?" Joaquin asked, noticing Sophia wince. "A little," she admitted. "But don't stop. I can take it." Thunder moved closer to the group, offering his body as additional protection. The horse seemed to understand they weren't safe yet. The surrounding forest was still filled with hungry eyes watching them. Finally, the last rope broke, and Sophia was free. She swayed slightly, but Joaquin caught her before she could fall. "Now we need to get out of here," he said, putting away his knife and lifting Helena into his arms. "Sophia, can you walk?" "I can," she replied with determination, though her legs were trembling. "We'll follow Thunder," Joaquin decided. "He knows the safe way." As if understanding the words, Thunder began to move slowly through the forest, carefully picking the least dangerous path. Joaquin followed with Helena in his arms, while Sophia clung to his shirt. Behind them, the wolves began to follow at a respectful distance, still waiting for an opportunity. The true journey back to safety was just beginning, and Joaquin knew that every step would be a battle against time and the predators lurking in the shadows. The journey back through the forest was tense and perilous. Joaquin carried Helena, who was too weak to walk long distances, while Sophia clung tightly to his shirt, using her acute hearing to warn him of obstacles in their path. Thunder led the group, his ears constantly swiveling, monitoring the sounds of the pack that followed them in the shadows. When they finally emerged from the forest and reached the Sterling family estate, dawn was painting the sky in golden hues. But the morning's tranquility was shattered by the sight of several cars parked in front of the main house. Isabella had kept her word. She had sought help. "What's happening?" Helena asked, noticing the commotion around the house. "Justice is arriving," Joaquin answered coldly, recognizing the police cruisers among the vehicles. Isabella was the first to see them approach. She ran toward the group, her eyes fixed on the girls she had believed were lost forever. When she saw the state they were in, clothes dirty and torn, faces pale with exhaustion, wrists marked by the ropes, she felt a wave of nausea at her own indirect complicity. "My God, they're alive," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Joaquin, where did you find them?" His words hit like a gunshot, confirming Isabella's worst fears about what Edward had done. She knelt before the girls, her hands trembling as she gently touched their faces. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." At that moment, Edward appeared on the porch of the house, flanked by 2 police officers. When his eyes met the daughters he had abandoned, his face went ashen, as if he had seen ghosts. For a moment, something that might have been relief crossed his expression, but it was quickly replaced by panic as he understood the implications of their survival. "How did they survive?" Joaquin finished for him, his voice as cold as ice. "Thanks to thunder and the grace of God. No thanks to you, that's for sure." Joaquin gently set Helena down and addressed the officer. "I found these 2 children tied to a tree in the middle of the woods, surrounded by a pack of wolves. They spent at least 2 nights exposed to the cold with no food or water." Edward tried to speak, but no sound came out. All the lies he had rehearsed, all the excuses he had prepared, seemed inadequate in the face of the living proof of his cruelty. The girl's words fell on Edward like heavy stones. He looked at Isabella, searching for some sign of support, but found only disgust in her eyes. She had moved away from him, both physically and emotionally, positioning herself beside the children he had betrayed. As the handcuffs were placed on his wrists, Edward finally found his voice. "They're okay," he said, as if that justified his actions. "They survived." 3 months after the rescue, Helena and Sophia's lives had completely changed. Joaquin and his wife Maria, who had always dreamed of having children but were never blessed with them, opened their hearts and their home to the girls. The adoption process was underway, facilitated by Isabella's testimony and Edward's imprisonment. The couple's simple but cozy house was on the same property where Joaquin worked, allowing the girls to maintain their connection with Thunder, who had become more than a pet. He was their protector, their friend, their hero. "Good morning, Thunder," Sophia whispered affectionately, stroking the horse's silky mane while Helena brushed his white coat. The girls had developed a morning routine of caring for the animal that had saved their lives, a way of repaying all the love and protection he had offered them. Maria watched the girls from the kitchen window, her heart overflowing with maternal love. She had dedicated herself completely to helping Helena and Sophia recover from the trauma, working with doctors specializing in visual impairment and child psychologists to ensure they had all the support they needed. "And Helena is learning to read Braille faster than we expected," Maria added with pride. "Her teacher says she has a natural talent." Isabella had become a regular visitor, bringing resources and emotional support whenever needed. The experience with Edward had profoundly changed her perspective on life, leading her to call off the wedding and dedicate part of her fortune to causes related to child protection. "And Helena?" Isabella asked, concerned for the girl who had always seemed more sensitive to the trauma. Therapy had been crucial to the girl's recovery. Dr. Annabelle Foster, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, worked patiently with them to process the terrible experience they had endured. Through play, tactile drawings, and gentle conversations, she helped Helena and Sophia understand that what happened was not their fault. "The most important thing," Dr. Foster had explained to Joaquin and Maria, "is that they feel safe and loved. Your unconditional love is the best medicine for healing the wounds of the heart. Edward, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his actions. Sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and child abandonment, he had lost not only his freedom but also his entire fortune to lawsuits and fines. His company had gone bankrupt, his reputation was destroyed, and he spent his days in a small cell, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. "They don't want to see you," Isabella had replied coldly, "and I won't force them to relive that trauma." "Aunt Maria!" Sophia called, using the affectionate title she had adopted for the woman who had become her new mother. "Can we make cookies for Thunder?" 6 months after that terrible night in Wolf Creek Hollow, Helena and Sophia's lives had transformed into something they could never have imagined. Autumn painted the property in golden colors they felt in the warmth of the sun and the scent of dry leaves, creating a symphony of sensations that filled them with joy. "Thunder, want to go for a ride?" Helena called, her voice filled with a confidence that grew each day. The white horse approached immediately, lowering his head so she could stroke his muzzle. The connection between them had deepened in a way that transcended normal communication between humans and animals. Sophia joined her sister, bringing the special reins Joaquin had custom-made, adapted equipment that allowed the girls to mount and guide Thunder safely. They had developed a unique language with the horse, using voice commands and specific touches that he understood perfectly. "Now we can ride Thunder all the way into town," Helena replied with pride. "Who would have thought that terrible night would make us stronger?" "They're walking miracles," Maria murmured to herself, emotional as she watched how the girls had overcome a trauma that could have destroyed their lives. "She's at the top of her class in math," Maria answered proudly, "and Helena is writing stories in Braille that make everyone cry." "Uncle Joaquin," Helena said, using the title she had kept even after the adoption, "we found a family of rabbits in the field. Thunder stopped so we could listen to them." During the celebratory lunch, the girls told stories of their daily adventures, their progress in school, and their dreams for the future. Helena wanted to be a writer, creating stories that showed the world that a visual impairment didn't limit one's imagination. Sophia dreamed of being a veterinarian, caring for animals just as Thunder had cared for them. "What's that, Dad?" Sophia asked, using for the first time the title she had been rehearsing for weeks. Meanwhile, miles away, Edward watched the sunset through the bars of his cell. He had received a letter from Isabella telling him about his daughter's happiness, about how they had blossomed in the love of their new family. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what he had lost, not just his daughters, but the opportunity to love and be loved unconditionally. Helena and Sophia ran free in the fields, guided by the familiar sounds of thunder and enveloped by the love of a family that saw them as perfect, exactly as they were. Their laughter echoed where once there was only terror, proving that true love can transform even the darkest experiences into stories of hope and overcoming.